Mr. Kosar, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I thank the Chairman and Ranking Member and the rest of the committee and its staff for having me here. My name is Kevin Kosar. I'm a senior fellow at R Street Institute, a think tank here in Washington, D.C., and previous to that, I spent 11 years at the Congressional Research Service. In my current position, I co-direct the Legislative Branch Capacity Working Group, a nonpartisan gathering of scholars and congressional experts who aim, as we like to put it, to make Congress great again. We meet each month here on the Hill to discuss aspects of congressional capacity, produce research on it, and we do all this in the hopes that Congress will empower itself to carry out its constitutional duties and to do what the public expects of it. So I'm obviously delighted to be here today because the power of the purse is a fundamental legislative authority. It's a power that aims to limit executive power, encourage agency accountability to elected officials, and to curb corruption. And it is a power, unfortunately, that Congress has delegated away in many instances. I was asked to testify on the subject of Federal agencies and their self-funding activities, and it's a large and obviously complex topic, to say the least. The President's budget reports the government collected $516 billion from the public this past year in the form of fees, user charges, and the like, which is a significant portion of the government's total revenues. Now, the principle that the collection and expenditures of funds should flow through Congress is longstanding. It is in our Constitution. All authority for collecting monies from the public and expending it are explicated in Article 1, which established the legislative branch. One will find no authorities over spending or collecting money in Article 2. Instead, the President is to ensure that the executive branch take care that the law be faithfully executed. The principle of congressional control over spending is also expressed in the Miscellaneous Receipts Act, first enacted in 1849. It obliges executive agents who collect funds from the public to promptly deposit the monies in the Treasury, whereafter Congress may reappropriate the funds or not, and also may direct to what the funds will be appropriated. While the principle is age-old and clear, congressional practice has frequently veered from it. As I note in my written testimony, the very first Congress passed a law that allowed customs officers and collectors in our young nation's ports to pay themselves from the monies they collected on the ships that arrived at the ports. Over the past 200-plus years, Congress repeatedly has enacted exceptions to the principles that all funds should flow into the Treasury, and the rationales have been many and varied. Here are just a few of them. One rationale is that allowing the agency to expend some portion of its fees is logistically more sensible and that it creates incentives for higher productivity. Such was the case with the aforementioned 1789 Customs Act. Customs officials were actually compensated based on the number of ships they inspected, and it was at a rate that was written into the law. In the second instance, Congress' rationale has been that an agency should be self-funding commercial enterprise and its activities should not be borne by the taxpayers as a whole. And therefore, if it's to operate in a financially self-sustaining manner, it needs to have broad discretion over the spending of its receipts and immediate access to their use. We see this with the Postal Service. A third rationale one finds is a political one, and this one is much more complicated in that we often will have a majority in Congress who wants to insulate an agency's spending from congressional influence by the minority, because the minority may disagree with what the agency is going to do with the spending. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau may well be an example of this line of thinking, wherein it is able to derive revenues through the Federal Reserve, but then it also has this fund through which it can use these monies for very, very broad purposes put in the statute. It is largely insulated, therefore, from appropriations. Now, assuredly, these aren't all the reasons Congress has created exceptions to the principle, but just a few. To anyone but experts in this room and appropriators, the government's practices for collecting funds from the public are bewildering. But I think the basic takeaway is fairly obvious. The progressive delegating away of the power of the purse, by definition, diminishes legislative authority. By how much? I'm not sure, and I think that would be something that would be interesting to discuss. It seems a difficult thing to quantify. It is heartening, therefore, to see Congress discussing this topic and discussing H.R. 5499, and I'm hopeful that fruits of these discussions are that Congress can reclaim some of its powers of the purse. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kosar. Mr. Hollister, you're recognized for 5 minutes.